In his first news conference as the president-elect, Donald Trump argued that the presidency, by its very definition, is above any conflict of interest. In an effort to clear up any perceived conflicts, he showed off the stacks of paperwork. Reporters really couldn't examine those stacks, turning over control, he said, of his businesses to his sons, deciding not to follow the customary practice of creating a blind trust. Another announcement that raised some questions was the appointment of his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to be a senior advisor at the White House. President-elect Trump comes to office as a political outsider with business entanglements that present a unique set of ethical questions. We're joined by Norm Eisen. He's an ethics expert at the Brookings Institution. He served President Obama during his first term. We're also scheduled to speak with Jan Baron from the law firm Wiley Rein. He's a former advisor to President George H.W. Bush, but he was called into court this morning and sends his apologies. So, Ambassador Eisen, let's begin with what I thought was an interesting kickoff by Donald Trump's attorney, who essentially said, listen, the president of the United States is pretty much not bound by any conflict of interest rules anyway. Is that accurate?
No, Soledad, it's not accurate. There are a vast array of conflicts rules that do apply to the president. It is correct that on that long list, there's one item, 18 U.S.C. 208, that doesn't. But there are others that do, and it starts with our United States Constitution. Our founders were so worried that a president would have a conflict of interest created by payments from foreign governments or foreign government agents that they prohibited those payments in the Constitution in the so-called emoluments clause. Emoluments is just a fancy 18th century word for benefits. Presidents cannot get cash or other benefits from foreign governments under the Constitution. So no, it is not true that conflicts law does not apply to the president.
He says that he would transfer the business holdings to his son. This would happen before he actually took office. He'd still receive sort of profit reports, but demurred on creating a blind trust.
Having his sons as trustees, that flies in the face of the definition of what a blind trust is with an independent trustee. By law, cannot be a family member. So it's a wholly inadequate solution to the problem.
Okay, it's inadequate. Is it illegal? I mean, does he actually, is it one of those things where it might be inadequate, but there's no one who's going to call him on it because he's president and there is no consequences?
Well, number one, in this case, it's not merely the policy of the federal government that he must do this. As it has been, presidents have done what has been called for Donald Trump that he failed to do for 4 decades.
But they've chosen to do it, right?
Well, I'll say he has. It's a little more complicated than a choice because it's the official policy of the Office of Government Ethics that the president should behave as if those laws applied. But in this case, here's the teeth. He has to do a trust. He had to transfer ownership to put up a clean break and a wall, a big, beautiful wall between him and all of these foreign government benefits, cash and other benefits, permits, trademarks, all the rest, loans that are coming to him. That is not optional. That's in the most fundamental law of the United States, our Constitution. And by hanging on to those ownership interests, he's hanging on to those foreign government benefits. He's going to be in violation of the Constitution from the moment he takes the oath of office, unless he uses the coming days to change course.
What are the consequences for that?
I think you're going to see a serious legal campaign to fight back and to get a court to order Donald Trump not to violate the Constitution.
I want to talk about Jared Kushner and the nepotism clause. So what happens in that particular case with Jared Kushner, his son-in-law?
Well, Soledad, Mr. Kushner said that he made a commitment in principle that he's going to apply all the laws to him. To himself. So he's going to apply conflicts law, ethics law, disclosure law. Now we need to see how he does it, how he works out all his investments. He himself is going to do a trust. He's exiting, selling things. So that's a commitment in principle I'd like to see his father-in-law make as well.
Ambassador Norm Eisen, nice to have you. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Soledad, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure's mine, you bet.